All right, well, welcome back for the afternoon program. Thanks for rejoining us. We got some great content coming up for you, and you can all pick up your I Survived Currywurst t-shirts on the way out of the program. There's a great lunch out there. Again, we've got some great stuff coming up this afternoon. For the next couple hours, we're going to be doing a little more of a focus on German-style browser games. I'm very excited. I know I'm going to get a lot of good learning out of this. This is, not a market I'm deeply involved in, so I'm excited. We're going to start with a panel led by Heiko Klinge. If you have read about the games industry in Germany, odds are that Heiko had a pretty good hand in it. He's been a games journalist since 2000. Everybody here has been doing something since 2000, which leads to my key observation that we have no 10-year-olds or younger on our panels. Heiko manages Making Games magazine, runs the Making Games talent recruiting event, the Key Players Trade Directory, Games.com jobs career website. He's all over the industry. He's a deeply knowledgeable man, and I'm sure he's going to lead us with a really amazing discussion. We're going to be talking about whether big IP leads to big gains in browser games. So,
thanks, Dave. Thank you. Okay, hi guys. When I was actually asked to do this panel, my first thought was really big IPs, big games. What a stupid question. I mean, absolutely. I was so struck by all the numbers from the Sims Social and the perfect example for doing some stuff with IPs and really making awful lots of money, getting awful lots of users, and they really managed to get an IP and transformed it into great social games and had a lot of success with it. At that point, actually, I was also playing Adventure World, and I was eagerly waiting for the content, Indiana Jones content. And then I was thinking, well, it's obviously not that easy doing stuff with IPs. I'm pretty sure that the Indiana Jones IP wasn't cheap, and the integration of this IP into that game wasn't really successful if you take a look at the numbers of Adventure World. So, just a few words about me so that you know who's actually talking here. If you Google my name, that's the first picture you get. So, I'm the guy who was embraced by Mark Rain, so I'm pretty hardcore. But still, I'm also doing other stuff like this magazine, like the Trade Directory. If you haven't picked up a copy, it's down at the registration desk, and you'll find, I think, more than 100 German companies in there, so a lot of information. And we're also doing a lot of events like conferences and the official recruiting forum of the Gamescom. And yeah, we deal a lot with browser game companies and casual game companies. So let me introduce our panelists. First one, right in the middle, is Ralf Adam. He's head of game development. He had an awful lot of positions, so I always have to look. At the moment, he's head of game development at Travian Games. So, but the interesting thing is he also worked on a project called Star Trek Infinite Space for Gameforge. It's a game, obviously, with a strong IP that hasn't come out yet. So perhaps we'll see that and can talk a little bit about that. So he has a lot of experiences with IPs and with the industry. At the moment, one of the biggest projects of Ralf is Travian, which is one of the biggest browser games worldwide and works quite well without any IPs. Then, obviously, if you take a look at the panel, we don't have Malte here, but Tung is here instead of him. Tung is also a non-executive director of Pro7 Sat.1, a big television company in Germany, and who's also big in games and doing a lot of IP games, MMOs, like I think this is how is it called? Marvel Super Hero Squad. Pretty nice. Well, I would say casual kids game MMO, but Iconic Future, which is also a company of Tung and Malte, deals with IPs actually, and IPs like Garfield and FC Barcelona. So you can go to these guys and actually buy IPs to integrate them into their games. Then to my right we have Jan Wagner from Cliffhanger Productions. He's the founder and creative director. At the moment, he's heavily working on a project called Jack the Lions Online, which is pretty interesting since it's a game IP and it's not really casual, but it's a casualized Jack the Lions, so that's perhaps one good reason to have him here.
I take offense on that.
And we plan to have Christian GODORR here from BigPoint instead of him. We have Philipp Reisberger. Philipp is the Chief Revenue Officer of BigPoint, and they're working on a lot of IP games. The biggest at the moment probably is Battlestar Galactica, and they also have like IPs like The Mummy. And then we don't have Christian Sauer, unfortunately, so I just skip through that. So my first question to the panelists would be, why do we actually need IPs? I mean, if you take a look, this is quite recent data from App Data. Oh, I missed Sim Social. So this is the top 20, and we have 4 games with an IP in that. So 16 games without an IP, still successful. So, Jan, actually, why did you buy an IP? I mean, you have the Jack the Lions IP, and you also bought the IP for Shadowrun.
Well, we haven't got the Jack the Lions IP, we're just working on the Jack the Lions IP, unfortunately. Otherwise, we'd get more money out of it. I think it's a question of whom you're addressing. And it's a question of the crowded market. I think with a free-to-play model becoming dominant, there is really no incentive for people to go to one way or the other because there's no barrier anymore, which also means there is no reason why I should shy away from this game and that game. So inherently, and we see that on a lot of the Facebook titles, inherently people are switching from one game to the next, to the next, to the next, and at the same time everybody's paying for a lot of advertising to get these players back in some way. And if I have a lot of advertising, then all the advertising becomes sort of the same again. So from a player perspective, if I get an IP and I can relate to that in some way where I go, okay, this is something that I expect would turn out like this and I would like that, then obviously we can, as a developer, as a publisher, we can save a lot of money acquiring people that don't have an idea what my game means, paying for them to get into the game, try out to have any clue of whether they like it or not, and then just stay away or stop playing it because it's similar to something else. Whereas if I have an IP, I know I'm interested in Shadowrun, I'm interested in Jagged Alliance, I pretty much have an expectation of what it would look like, and if I as a developer can fulfill that expectation to a degree, the likeliness that people are actually going to stick around and pay for it will be much higher. So for us, it's a simple standing out from the crowd and attracting the right sort of people without having to cast our nets as wide as a lot of other people will have to.
Okay, so Ralph, Travian games, most games of Travian games are without an IP or bigger IP. So is it just some sort of calculation, buying users or buying IPs?
Well, first of all, I think we have an IP, which is Travian, which is actually becoming an IP in itself, and for us that's a good thing because we don't need to pay anything to anybody, but we're creating value out of our own company. The thing is, IP can make a lot of sense. One reason to get an IP was perfectly pointed out by Jan. I mean, the reason why we bought the Star Trek IP or the Star Trek license at Gameforge was a strategic decision because we said, okay, we want to, I mean, there are big markets where we are not present yet, and one of the biggest is, of course, the United States market, and getting there as a European developer or publisher is always hard. So we thought of, okay, how can we have an easy entry to the United States market? And then we had the opportunity, the chance to get the Star Trek IP, and we said, that's a perfect match because everybody within the United States knows Star Trek. So even if they are not aware of Gameforge, we will immediately have a strong response from the PR side, from press, and everybody will be really excited about it. And actually that was the case. We got a lot of press coverage in the United States. So there might be strategic decisions to get an IP, but of course it has to be a fit. So if you look at the portfolio and the games we're doing at Travian Games, we're focusing on strategy games. For example, the latest game we're just in open beta is called Remanum, which is a mixture of a trade simulation, strategy game, some RPG elements inside as well. I couldn't come easily up with an IP that would fit to that kind of game. So just buying an IP to have an IP, if it does not relate to the game, it's not bringing you any bonus, and it can even backfire. I think one of the other interesting examples you just had here, even if you have a great IP, and you mentioned The Sims, which immediately became very popular as Sims Social. I don't know, when was World of Warcraft released? Early 2003 or something? I remember GDC San Francisco, when they were still in alpha or something, World of Warcraft, and nobody was talking about World of Warcraft at all, but everybody said the next big thing will be Sims Online, because it's such a big IP and it will be such a big game. Well, yeah, it turned out to be wrong. So just having an IP and saying, oh, we make a great game and that's easy, well, it's not always true.
Okay. Perhaps a question to Philip, according to that and adding up to that. BigPoint does quite a lot with IPs, with games like The Mummy, with games like Battlestar Galactica. Still, I think your most successful browser games are at the moment Farmerama and I think Skyrama. We have so games without. All that. So yeah, a lot of browser games without IPs. So is it also a little bit a question of the target group that games like The Mummy and Battlestar somehow struck me that they are Unity based, so it can have a very high visual quality. Was that a conscious decision, or is it really, well, we have that IP, what do we do with it?
I mean, I really have to add to what Ralf said. I mean, entering the American market with an IP, with a known IP, just goes after the saying, candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. So an IP can be the liquor, so that's the fun part about it. People know about Battlestar Galactica or whatever the IP is. So that's something that could really help you on one side. On the other side, you always have to manage two sides. So you don't have to just manage the community of providing a good game, but you have to manage the original IP holder. And that's something where you have to be very careful of how to. It's not as easy as it looks sometimes. Mm-hmm.
So, Tung, I can actually talk to you guys and buy IPs. You own IPs or you have IPs and trade to IPs like Garfield or FC Barcelona, I think Sporting Lisbon. So what I was wondering, these are very single IPs, so it's not easy to do a FC Barcelona football game or a Sporting Lisbon soccer game. I don't know how many people would buy that outside of Portugal. Why might these IPs be useful?
Okay, first of all, we are not a game developer, so I would like to sort of give a short description of what Iconic Future is doing. They are representing multi-category rights for premium virtual goods that you can bring into games, and that on all multiple platforms like browser games, mobile, console, client-server games. And what we do is actually we try to bring good IPs, big IPs, together with games. One of the examples that we have, what we can sort of tell about, is that with a Travian subsidiary, Northworks, they have a game which is called Goal United, and it's a soccer game, and there we have brought in, for example, brand IPs like Barcelona and Benfica Lisbon. And it's an enhancement, so people, users like to identify with games, but also with IPs they know. So, for example, when we brought in a tricot or a stadium that we have implemented into the game, it actually sold. So we're also serving sort of monetization needs of the game developers, but also consumer needs who are sort of more attracted to big brand IPs. And what we did, for example, with BigPoint, is that they have a famous game which is Farmerama, which also has a high reach, a high usage, but there we brought in Shaun the Sheep. And that actually also sold really in the 5-digit area, as well as with Northworks and Goal United. There we sold tricots and stadiums on the 5 to 6-digit areas.
So are perhaps adding up to that question to Ralf and Philip, are smaller IPs that really useful to really do something with monetization and item sales?
Well, like I said, and that's a perfect example, it has to fit, so you can't just put an IP and put it on a game if it does not fit, but with Northworks and Goal United, it was a perfect match, and especially, I mean, everybody knows who's interested in soccer knows Barcelona, so that was a real benefit to the game. So I don't know. I would hope maybe we can also put in Eintracht Frankfurt one day, but
maybe don't put Shaun the Sheep in your game.
Yeah, there you go. That wouldn't be such a big benefit, I guess.
No. But what we're really seeing is talking about IPs. There are different aspects of IPs. So you could have whole games branded as like Battlestar Galactica or Infinite Space with an IP, or you could brand items of what Iconic Future, for example, is doing, or you could brand certain mechanics or whatever it is. So you really have to differentiate of what you really think should be the goal of it. So we don't think that integrating Shaun the Sheep in Farmerama will be appealing all over the world, but in one of the main markets we have, as Germany is, it's very beneficial because people know Shaun the Sheep, people know Farmerama, and it's just a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now we talked a lot about the users and our customers. Tung, perhaps a few words about, because I know you have a lot of experience with that, about venture capitalists and investors. Are they really looking for IPs? Is this helpful if talking to publishers and investors?
If you have IPs, you mean, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Does it make it easier to explain your game, or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have a brand, if you have an IP, I mean, that's you don't have to explain so much. So if you go to investor, if you talk to consumers, if it's about marketing costs, you know, you automatically reduce, or it enables, it accelerates, it makes life easier in many aspects.
Okay, perhaps some additions from you, Jan, because Cliffhanger Production doesn't have that enormous track record. So how were your talks with Shadowrun?
We actually had a hard time. I think it's different for us because we were looking at game IPs and we're looking for gamer content to a degree. So we actually had to convince the IP holders based on the strength of our concept for the game. So we had to really make sure or they wanted to make sure, because they don't know us and we haven't got a track record as a development company. We've only been a producing company before. And of course it's by, like, they've got a certain amount of expectations, and the licenses that we've got, they were treated badly before. So we were in the lucky position that they said, okay, somebody that understands our IP at last is willing to do something with it, as opposed to, you know, give me your IP, I slap it on something, and you know, we're both going to be rich. That wouldn't have worked, A, because I'm not rich, and B,
so
because
you didn't have to pay for
it. We actually paid dearly for it, but nowhere near what probably BigPoint paid for Battlestar Galactica.
You know what the good thing about BigPoint is? They like working with us.
Yeah, I know. And it's hopefully at some stage that's going to be true for us. Currently, we're famous enough for that. But I think it's really important for the IP holders that there's two kinds. One is where they are commercialized, and we had that. I mean, we both pitched for Game of Thrones, BigPoint and us, and we were starting to talk to Mr. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones, before the HBO series came out. And he was like, I can't really make, I don't know what the difference is between the games that you make and the other games that I've already have sold licenses for, and talk to my agent. And the agent couldn't make a difference between online game and an offline game, and a browser versus a client MMO and whatever. So for about a year we were, running around in circles and trying to convince them that we actually, what kind of game it is. We already agreed on what kind of content we would want. And Mr. Martin was okay with it. He said, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. Seems to be you understood my license. It's dear to me. I'm still the direct owner for it. So that was okay." And then when HBO stepped in, they basically treated it the license like you treat any other merchandise. So whether you print cups or you make games, they didn't care. If I came to them and said, well, I want to do a calendar, or I want to do a sex toy for Game of Thrones, that's okay with them as well. It's just how much money can I bring.
Okay,
so
there you have your new business idea.
Yeah. HBO series generally feature a lot of sex, so I don't think that's too far-fetched. But anyway, there's a clear differentiation between the IP holders that care about their license and the IP holders that see it more as a merchandising opportunity.
Okay. Well, yeah, we talk about that later as well. Okay, one thing I think that's pretty important for all these guys here sitting here when looking at IPs, and that's a question again for you, Jan. It's a question because brand IPs versus game IPs, because there are a lot of game IPs out there from the 80s, 90s that people would like to play actually, who get now my age, so shortly above 30, don't have time for that big games anymore, but would like, would like to play some browser games in the evening and stuff like that. On the other hand, we have these brand IPs that might be more appealing for casual gamers. Or so what are the things that you actually have to consider when doing when deciding between brand IPs or a game IP? I mean, you're doing both.
I think it comes back to what these guys already said. By and large, it's which target group are you trying to get, and what are you trying to accomplish? Brands, by and large, IPs work by association and by expectations. So if I see Battlestar Galactica being announced, I go, oh, I like the series, I might be interested in the game. And then I find out it's, for Battlestar Galactica it's fairly straightforward because it has to do with, spaceships and they shoot at each other. So that's pretty much part of the series. But what isn't part of the game is, a lot of the character development. So if I'm into the character development of Battlestar Galactica, maybe I'm not interested in the subject of a space shooting game. So with IPs, there is how much of the expectation that the user associates with a topic can you actually bring. With Shaun the Sheep in Farmerama, it's fairly simple because it's a fun setting. It doesn't have the same attachment. The decision from the user side isn't, oh, I'm going to play Shaun the Sheep game. I'm going to play Farmerama, and oh, there's Shaun the Sheep. I like that as well. So that's a different association here. And for us, it was quite clear. We actually aim at you, more or less, like the ex-core gamer target group that now has a job and perhaps a family, or me, which is basically the same thing. I have a family. I don't have the time to Skyrim is just too complicated for me, and I can't beat my kid at anything that has to do with two thumbs. So we are doing games that appeal to a certain target or audience, where we also think there is obviously a higher revenue because these guys don't have time, but they have money, which in free-to-play terms means they actually spend for what we want them to spend for. Mm-hmm. There are other uses of that, so I don't think IP is a general tool that you can slot into anything. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and because we're very small, thank you, we just stuck to the IPs that we could get and stuck to the target group that we are confident we can reach and can really make something worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And other people have more, have a broader scope, and they can do different things.
Okay, perhaps an open question. What's a better idea, starting with a game and then thinking what IP might fit to that, or thinking of IPs and then thinking about what game would fit to that IP?
It's easy.
Well, I think it's easy. You should always start with the game, especially if you're a developer. I mean, if you're a publisher, and again, with Gameforge, it was not, okay, let's make a great game, and we put the Star Trek IP on that, but that was a strategic decision. But in general, you should always come first with, okay, what could be a great idea, and once you have the idea, I mean, Farmerama is the best example. That was first Farmerama, and then the style and everything's cute, and Shaun the Sheep would fit perfectly, so let's get the IP for that.
I mean, it's as easy as this. A great game can work without an IP, but an IP with a very shitty game is very tough to survive in our area.
I totally agree. For example, I remember that in 2006, EA came out with The Godfather, which is a big IP, and I think they invested $20–30 million, but the game was really not good, and it failed. So this is actually an example. And I think at the end, it's about content. It's about you have to convince the consumer. If the game is good, then it speaks for itself, and you can enhance it with a brand.
Okay, now that we know if we want an IP, how do I get an IP? Do I just take the phone and dial the personal number of Mr. Martin?
That depends whether you're him or me.
Okay, so do you know the number of Mr. Martin to get the IP?
It's not me personally, but even Big Point has to pitch, so it's not that. I mean, the good thing with now nearly 1,000 people and having a track record with Battlestar Galactica as a Hollywood IP and even Drakensang as a gaming IP, we have a proven track record, so we can show other people and other IP holders that we are able to execute. So that makes things a lot easier. And once you have your games out, I'm 100% sure it will make life will be a lot easier. But it's just a normal pitching process, or you talk to people like these who are dealing with the rights.
Do you have any hints for these guys how to scout for good IPs?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
No, actually, you come from both sides, actually. You can, on the one side, say, hey, I have these IPs in my shelf. On the other side, and I think that was also the process when we partnered up with BigPoint, with Farmerama. We talked to the people, to the operating guys, to the producer, and the head of product management for Farmerama said, Shaun the Sheep, I think this IP I would like to have in my game. And then we tried to figure out who is the person, who is the company to talk to, and we called them up and secured the IP.
Okay. How did you get the Shadowrun IP?
We did a lot of emailing.
Okay.
It's obviously we have that sort of disadvantage, and it took us about a year to actually get there, from like first contact being ignored, second contact being ignored, third contact. Okay, other person was annoyed, but they started taking it seriously, and then we could actually show that we were prepared, and we shooting on slides. And then from then on, there was relatively long, because it's not as easy, because we don't have a track record and we don't have a lot of money we can actually spend on the IP, so we got it for as much money as we could pay, and probably less money than these guys would have wanted. So the negotiations took us much longer than if you've got a business running. But by and large, it's legwork. I mean, even to you guys, it's legwork. You need to find out who's the holder. Sometimes IPs aren't really in one place. Like Shadowrun, for example, has an IP for the computer rights, for the computer game rights, that's aligned with Microsoft. Microsoft sub-licenses to Smith & Tinker, Smith & Tinker sub-licenses to us. There is a point where the contract refers back to Microsoft, then we have to do with Microsoft, which everybody knows is a lot of fun. And the book rights are with somebody else, and the film rights are with a third party, and you find IPs like that are very, very diluted over history. And a lot of gaming IPs, unfortunately, are that. Like Jagged Alliance was owned by, I think, 7 companies that did nothing with it, like over the time, or that started doing something and never bring out a game. And even finding out who actually has the rights to what. And for Jagged Alliance, for example, we've got a funny example that the English rights, the rights to the English version are bought and they were owned by Atari, or brought in by Atari, now owned by BitComposer, whereas the rights to the German localization, and only the localization, is owned by Success. And again, people that you little bit like Microsoft in a different kind, so you really don't want to deal with them, mostly, if you can prevent it. So we have to make do with a non-German, like we don't have a German version from out the door, because we can't use the German localization files. Otherwise, he would sue our asses off. So that is often the point, that with an IP, with film IPs, it's the same thing. You've got the producers, you've got the actors, staff provides that. When we did Stargate with Joe Wood, we've got like 10 people we need to go to for green light for something.
I mean, it's fairly easy. In a nutshell, just signing the IP once you've signed the contract, which can be a long, tiring way, and this is only the beginning, but once you have to give approval for characters, for game design, for whatever's going to be done, can take forever. And one example, which I have already quoted sometimes, is it was quite easy for us to get approval on the ships, but getting approval, especially on the female characters, took us quite some time, and it took a lot longer than actually building these characters. So it's like, go back, go forth, no, sorry, I have a smaller nose, no, sorry, my hair is longer, or whatever it is. So that's something, if you're a very small company, you have to be aware that this can really take a lot of time, a lot of resources.
Okay, so are there any resources that I could tap in order to find out who actually owns the rights of this special IP? Is there a website called who'stheiPowner.com?
I know there are some, I've never been to any, but there are some big shows in the United States where you can go to, where it's all about IP, especially about TV. Maybe you've been there, Philip, I don't know. There are 2, one at the East Coast, one at the West Coast, I forgot the name. But that's mainly for film, but you can go there and talk to the IP holders directly. It's also about, I think, for novels, books, and something like that. I mean, Comic-Con is probably a good show to go to, because mostly of the IP holders are there as well. So if you want to talk directly to IP holders and don't have any connections or contacts, I would try a convention like that, actually.
I think that's one way for live IPs, and usually you already talk to agents, which means you already start in the sales process. If you want to really just check who's owning the IP, go to the trademarks. I mean, there's a trademark database for Europe and there's a trademark database for the US. If the IP is in either, then pretty much you can be pretty sure that that's where you need to go. If it isn't, you probably know that either there's trouble or that the IP maybe isn't owned by anybody, and you just go ahead and rip it off. These two trademark databases are really at the core of the first attempt to go out and find out who might be the owner. In actual fact, funny enough, a lot of times the owner is not the company that you might expect it to be, because you think, I don't know what, Acclaim owns this and that, but Acclaim has been sold and it's essentially an empty shell. So somebody owns Acclaim, and then somebody else bought the rights to that, and blah blah blah. So a lot of the rights where you remember, this game was made by, or this film was made by, blah blah blah. That doesn't have anything to do with who actually owns it. And the trademarks database, especially if it's an established IP and there's some logo or brand attached to it, that can pretty much tell you where you need to go.
Okay. The bad thing especially about game IPs is that sometimes even the company themselves don't know that they own an IP or not. I was working at Infogrames when we bought, at the time they bought GT Interactive, Hasbro and stuff like that. And I was calling the headquarter because I had some question regarding some IPs, and they said, well, we can answer you in half a year whether we own the IP or not. We need to find out. So depending on the size of the company, it can take a while.
Okay. So, and what do I need in order to get an IP? Is it only a question of money, or is it only a question of capability, or is it a mixture, or how much money do I actually need?
Depends on the IP.
Yeah.
Well, basically, I think it's about convincing the IP holder that you will serve the IP well and both sides will benefit from it and will make money. So in the end, they of course are always interested in money, but especially IP holders, like when we talk to Star Trek, which has such a long history, CBS is of course also interested in not just getting cheap money out of it or fast money, but that we treat the IP itself well and don't hurt anything or the feelings of the fan base outside or spoil the IP in general. I mean, I worked for Disney, and I think when it comes to taking care of their brands, they're one of the best companies in the world. Was working on IPs such as Winnie the Pooh and stuff like that, and they have big IP Bibles, and they know exactly what will work within the Winnie the Pooh universe and what doesn't, and they have very, very good understanding of how they want to treat their IPs and what works and what does not work. And if you convince them that you will serve something that does not hurt their IP and everybody gets money out of it and is happy with it, then that's the best way of getting an IP. So it's not just about the money, it's not just about the capabilities, it's not just about reputation, it's a mixture of all of these elements, I would say.
How, perhaps a question to Toon, how flexible are IP holders when it comes to business models? Are revenue shares also possible?
Yes, indeed. Actually, compared to the colleagues here on the panel, with us it's much easier because actually our model is based on rev share. So we try to organize the IPs, and the good thing about Iconic Future is that the founders, they have a license and an IP DNA in the former life or in the existing lives. What they do also parallel is that they were trading sports rights like Bayern Munich, like Barcelona, etc. So it's easier for them because their thinking is different. And for us, it's actually pretty easy. If you have a good game is on the one side a good game that is played by many consumers, by many users, and you have a certain reach, then it becomes automatically also attractive to IP holders because if you have done the match, it makes sense for an IP holder to go there and to have his brand item being implemented into it. And our model is based on rev shares, meaning that it costs nothing for the developer, and we share with the developer and also with the IP holder.
Okay. Now that we actually own this IP, we found out we want this IP, we negotiated some months, we have everything signed. What do I have to think of when using this IP? How can I efficiently make use of an IP? We talked a lot about it's the game at first, but is it really that easy? I mean, if you have a game like Go United and then you buy an IP like the FC Barcelona, you probably did some adjustments to the game in order to really make that IP fit, or didn't you?
Well, it was above the stadium of Barcelona, so it wasn't such a big deal. But I can tell you, taking the Star Trek license and making something that is fast-paced and action-oriented and putting it into the Star Trek license is another beast. So it depends on the IP, of course. With the stadium, it wasn't a big deal. But depending on the IP, you might come to the conclusion, well, I have a great game, but the things I want to do within the game don't necessarily fit to the IP. So
Star Trek is so well known for fast ship-to-ship combat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as easy as this stay in lore, so know what you are allowed to. So with Battlestar Galactica, it's tough introducing 10 new races. In Star Trek, it's mandatory to have a lot of different races. And these are the things you have to be aware of. But another very important aspect is really you have to manage the time, and you have to be aware that approvals might take a week or two, or you can't really define saying, okay, on the blueprint it's like 1 or 2 days, but officially it always takes a lot longer.
Bearing in mind that most of these people are actually not gamers, so they have a very different way of looking at things. I mean, when we used to work with Stargate, they were always like, send us screenshots, we don't care about the game, just want to see how the visuals look. And then at one stage they actually sat down with the game and they were like, oh, that's completely wrong. It's like, guys, you wanted to have screenshots. We tried to send you the game. You didn't want the game. It's like, yeah, well, you have to redo it. And that's another thing. They don't care about your timelines. They don't care at all. I mean, you can pressure them and say, go, guys, you're hurting the product and blah. But by and large, they have as much time as they want for you to change the product. And there comes a time when you actually, it really hurts the development schedule a lot.
But on the other side, what we're seeing is once you have brought a product live and you have proven yourself of being able to execute, and it really depends on the IP holder, but what we are now doing with our games is we are even further developing the IT for the online area together with the IP holder. And that's something you always have to stick in some boundaries, some ways, of course. You won't find little Smurfs in Battlestar Galactica or something like that, but it's even then possible to further develop it, and that's something to beauty of every developer, of having an IP and even further developing the heritage of it.
Yeah, that brings us to this point. How do I make the maximum use out of an IP? I mean, it's one thing having an IP, and it's another thing really putting it out to the audience. And if you have a non-gamer IP, for instance, so what tool sets do you have to think of in order, if you have a game like Farmerama and are integrating Shaun the Sheep? I mean, you have to think of other things like marketing and stuff. So, or is it just okay? We put in Shaun the Sheep, and our users will love it, and we have some viral effect, and that's it.
I mean, the good thing with Farmerama, the community is crazy. So, whatever we do, if there's a way of leaking or getting it somewhere from the client or whatever, they distribute it all over the world in terms of forums and how active this community is. So it's fairly easy of introducing new stuff into Farmerama, and they just love it. That's a very, very easy part, of the very good part. But apart from that, of course, pre-activate your community, use newsletters, use cross-promotion, potentially even if you have the deals, put it on TV and just let the people know, of course.
Mm-hmm. What about if you have brand IPs, and does it make it easier to really get into television?
Well, again, it depends. But if you have something, for example, like Star Trek, we had not only press coverage, but TV station were calling us because we heard you working on something on Star Trek, so it's famous to them as well. So we had some TV shows making some small or even a 10-minute report on it in German television about the making of the game and stuff like that. You can definitely benefit if it's a well-known IP from something like that. So it's not that you need to go out there and tell everybody, but people will suddenly come to you and say, oh, we heard about that. And even GameStar is making some reviews about a browser game, which is not something you do all the time. So, yeah, of course.
Getting there.
Yeah.
Finally, yeah. Okay, so, and how do I activate an IP with people who actually don't play games? I mean, because we talk a lot about that IPs are useful for activating new target groups, but how do I actually use this IP to activate them?
Put it where the people are. I mean, if you have non-gamers, and just like I mentioned, if you have the possibility to combine the product with that IP, put it on TV if they don't play, and Sean might convince, or eventually can convince someone playing a game because they like Sean.
Breakfast cereals might be a good idea.
For an example.
Okay.
Don't put it on cars.
Yeah, I would agree, but again, it depends on the IP, because I think you can definitely get the attraction of non-players by something like Shaun the Sheep, and they might even then start playing Farmerama. But let's be true, with Star Trek, and I guess it's the same for you with Battlestar Galactica, or especially for you with Jagged Alliance, we never really targeted for non-players. The more hardcore your IP is, the more you need to be sure that, okay, you're just getting gamers. You get their attraction more easily, but I don't think that anybody who has never played a game will start playing Battlestar Galactica or the Star Trek game.
We haven't tried Drakensang yet on cereal boxes.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean,
Okay.
Run.
So I'd like to talk to you guys now about challenges for game IPs. Yeah. This screenshot is just for you, Ralph. It's a screenshot of a game called The Guild 1400. The Guild was or still is quite a popular trade sim IP for core gamers, and Ralph did a browser game out of that together with his team. And you probably had quite a lot of challenges when doing that. So what are the biggest challenges when changing a game IP into a new game? Can you share some war stories with us?
I can tell you exactly. I can exactly tell you about that, especially with the Guild, because it's a good example. Guild was a very famous, or like you said, is still maybe popular among hardcore players here in Germany, a trade sim, and we thought that might be a perfect game or a perfect match for transferring it into the browser, especially because this game was already, when it was a boxed version, very popular among people playing it in LAN. With multiplayer, 8 or even 16 players. So in this game, you're taking the role, or you can take a profession within a medieval city and start building up your own whatever you're trying to achieve, and then go into politics and make intrigues. And it had some board game elements inside as well, and some RPG elements, and we thought that's a perfect match for the browser. But the problem with browser games is they usually are either even endless or have turns of 6 months, something like that, and you just don't play them 10 hours in a row and this is it. But you need to change the gameplay in a way that you go in there every day, play some content but not all of it, and have fun with it. I can imagine that's the same with Jagged Alliance. They have the same challenge and the same problems with transferring something that is meant to be fun for 10, 15, maybe 20 hours into something that is fun for months or even years without ending, and then even paying for it. So with the Guild, that was one of the biggest challenges, and if I would look back, kind of making off or postmortem, what I would definitely change for something like the Guild is, the problem was with the Guild was that with Gameforge, all games don't have an end. So the servers run forever until everybody dropped out and started the game on a new server. So there's no real end game in any of the Gameforge games, such as O-Game or Ikariam. We don't have any, or they didn't have any end game kind of curve. And we also did not have that in the Guild, and that was one of the biggest problems. While with Travian, all our games end at a certain stage, so we have end game. It's not, you just don't play them for three weeks, but usually after 6 months, something like that. And with having a different system like that, you can better balance and time the whole gameplay. So if I would start over with the Guild again, I would definitely put in an end game, but make it at some point say, okay, this game ends here.
How do you solve this challenge with Jagged Alliance Online?
I think he has just gotten a new idea.
I think we need to get an end game. Yeah. No, I mean, we're going to have a session on that later on anyway, so I invite you to stay for that. But first of all, I think it's about session length as well as there's two things. There's continuity of gaming, and then there's the rhythm of gaming. Now, if I sit down with a core game, I expect to play for 1 or 2 hours, straight. And I expect to have a certain amount of rewards and successes in that time. If I have to do that in a browser game, I need to make sure that even if people play for 3/4 of an hour on average, they will still play only for 15 minutes maybe. So I need to have a reward cycle that fits into this space. Now for social games, the way they do it is they give you rewards for walking, breathing, eating, that stuff, and you're fairly constantly rewarded for what you do. So at any break-off point, you're pretty happy. In Jagged Alliance, we have sort of a mission, and a mission has a minimum amount of time, and if you don't make it until that end time, it just stops. I mean, you're not get rewarded, and you're not happy. So we need to make that sort of change to the session length. And at the same time, because we are using core gamers, we need to have complexity that appeals to them. So we have no choice but to make sessions longer, the higher level the players are. So initially you get small maps, later on you get larger maps, because otherwise we can't really increase the complexity of the game and the challenge of the game for the people. Whether that works out will remain to be seen, but I'm convinced that session length is as much as same sort of the same importance as having the endless gameplay, because these are the sort of two ends that are different than core games. And first of all, I mean, of course, like all the core gamers hated us when we first announced it. They were like, "Oh, it's going to be Jagged Allianceville, and we hate you for killing our license finally." And it took us a long time to convince them otherwise. So
that's a good point, and I would like to talk with Philip about it. Because you had the IP of Drakensang, a traditional Baldur's Gate style RPG on the PC, and turned it into an action RPG style browser game. So you had to deal with a very core game oriented audience, and I saw quite a lot of negative feedback regarding the state of the game when it got into beta. I mean, for most people, it's completely normal. Then we have a browser game. It's open beta, so it's not finished. Drakensang Online came out with 2 heroes, and all the core gamers were saying, "Well, only 2 heroes for an action RPG. What's that kind of a game?" So
you know what the good thing about Drakensang Online compared to the previous installments of Drakensang is? They might start with 2 heroes, but just a week later, there might be a 3rd one, or another dungeon, or another thing. So,
do you really have the time to convince the audience of staying with you?
Well, I think just this month or last month we hit like the 5 or 6 million people there, and it's quite interesting. It's only been online for like half a year, and this half a year more people are playing now Drakensang that have been in the 10 years before with all installments. So I think, and we see this, Drakensang is one of our biggest successes we see around. So for us, it's absolutely the right way we did it, and we'll continue doing it. And we're very happy about our Berlin team of being able to execute at this quality and this pace. So, of course, everyone wants 10 heroes, 25 dungeons, and, I don't know, 1 million hours of gameplay. But you really have to differentiate between, yes, I would like to have another hero, or am I okay with the gameplay or not? And what we're seeing with Drakensang, people really love the game.
Do you see, perhaps to the other guys, do you really see some sort of mind shift happening with gamers that are actually accepting free-to-play games, social games, casual games with IPs, starting with less content that they're used to with core games that they buy for 40, 50 euros at the store?
Well, I think it's a bit like Philip said. It's not about bringing out the big beast that has everything in it, but what you bring out.
And no one wants to play potentially.
Yeah, but what you bring out has to be polished and good. So if it's something small, if it's fun, people will say, "Hey, that's great, but give us more." But you keep them.
And that's the best that could happen to you.
Yeah, but that's a way better way than putting something out that is big and have everything in it, but nothing is polished and it's all cheesy and UIs suck and all that kind of things. So better something small but polished than something big, because there are so many other games out that are free to play. So the thing is, if you paid 40 or 50 bucks for a box, you're willing, even if the first 10, 15 minutes suck, to spend more time because you already paid the money. If the first 5 minutes in a free-to-play game are not good, people will just say, "Oh, I don't care, I go to another game and try my luck there."
Okay.
We're desperately trying to disagree, so maybe I'd try to. First of all, I mean, I looked it up yesterday, you've got over 8 million users in Drakensang currently registered. But how many CCUs does that transfer to, and how many active players? So for me, the question is, of course, you can get everybody in. The question is, how long can you get them to stay? And are these times until they see more content, is that quick enough? Or are they going like, I've waited for 3 weeks, I'm not going to wait anymore? You know? The critical thing, I think, is in this regard then to the license or the IP helps to be more patient, because there's some sort of promise inside the license that goes, you know, the good old times are going to come back. You know, the thing that you love will going to come to you if you, you know, just going to continue to play for a couple of months until we really got it, you know, right. And then at the same time, you've got very, very loud and very outspoken opposition that says, you know, we hate you for killing our license, and this is not going to go. This is not good enough, and I don't believe you'll ever be able to do that. And there's, I mean, I think most of the companies that are professional enough have become quite adept at spotting initially where it's going to go, and you pretty much can tell very quickly when the numbers are growing.
Talking about Drakensang, we didn't start Drakensang with 1 hour of gameplay. We started with 10 or 20 or even 30 hours of gameplay. So
it took me 6 to kill like the last of your enemies.
The very interesting thing about Drakensang is, or about any game, and that's even regardless of IP or not, as compared to the retail stuff, is you have a whole community that loves your game and is really eager monitoring each of, like, whether you go left or right in terms of development, and you get instant feedback. So this is a huge opportunity of further developing a game with your community. And if you're able to reach your community, to understand your community correctly, you can build a great game that people really love to play. And we wouldn't have 8 million registrations if it wasn't a working game.
That's actually why online games have such a long life cycle. Yeah. Look at Travian, look at Dark Orbit, look at Seafight. Okay. They have been out for 5, 6, 7 years now.
Yeah. Okay, but then perhaps we still want to open the Q&A for the audience. So just a quick tap in. Are there any things that are completely different that you have to keep in mind when dealing with brand IPs? Is it? I mean, if I buy an IP from Iconic Future and and want to integrate Garfield into my game, is it just a give and go, or do I have to stay in contact and really deal with the license owner after that one? And
okay, of course there's some criteria that you have to follow, but Iconic Future, or we as an enabler, help the developer sort of to implement and also to tell what can we do, what can we not do, based on what we have negotiated with the IP holder.
Well, again, it depends on the IP, but for big IPs such as Battlestar Galactica, and Philip already mentioned it, or Star Trek.
I prepared something for that.
Yeah, thank you, or that one. The thing is, you don't just, you know, say hello, sign the contract, and come back 2 years later with the final game, but you have to stay in steady contact with them, and you even have to plan in all the approval processes, and that was mentioned before.
Dedicate a lot of resources.
Yeah, I mean, every single enterprise model or whatever needs to be approved by CBS. So when you build up your project plan, you even plan in all the approval processes, and it takes a while, and you need plan in some iterations, and if things come back and are not approved and all that kind of stuff. So it mainly, the whole work mainly, of course, is on the project management side, that you need to plan in all these cycles, and that you have, of course, some buffer for complaints.
So do you basically need another outsourcing manager dealing with the license holder?
Depending on the size, that can help, actually.
Yeah, I think actually could help. I think the difference between IP and a completely new game is managing expectations, and that's actually on every side, like the user's expectations, the license holder's expectations, your own expectations, as you know, what the license can do for me, and how much time would I need to invest. And it's really about that. And with a new game, you have got a clean slate. I mean, you do a game, it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, it will go off and it won't. That's all fairly. It's difficult enough, but it's already fairly straightforward. With license, everybody thinks they know what they're going to get, or everybody thinks they know what they want, and then you're in the middle person that actually has to make everybody happy to a degree without losing your own track.
Okay, thanks so far, guys. So I would like to open up the discussion. So if you have any questions regarding IPs, you have a lot of IP owners and IP developers here, so please don't hesitate to ask.
I have a question regarding the Guild. It's a German IP, so the browser game was called Guild in Germany, but in other countries it had a different name, Europe 1400 or something. So I was wondering, isn't it bad actually for the IP? I mean, you're supposed to get it and create from a game, a browser game out of it, and try to strengthen the IP so that everybody knows it. But because of the different territories, you get an IP and you have to like split it. Isn't it a bad tactic? I mean, you have to create a Twitter account with different. You have to create different accounts like for different players. So I was wondering what's the idea behind this?
Yeah, that was definitely a problem with the guild, but we couldn't change it because of the fact that the original IP already had different names in different territories, so we had no other choice. So having something like Jagged Alliance that is called Jagged Alliance worldwide, of course, is way easier. Still, one of the big benefits when doing the guild, apart from that we had a gameplay we all believed in, was we also had all the assets. So all the assets that are used in the guild 1400 on the guild online were taken out of the original guild, of course tweaked again and Photoshop and stuff like that. But getting a game IP sometimes also can help in terms of the assets. So that was a big plus. But the problem you've mentioned, yeah, that was absolutely true, especially for an online game when you have different website names in different territories. Yeah.
More questions? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the IP of Drakensang. With respect to the 8 million registered users, do you know how many users played this game before when it was still a box product? So how much reliable continued fans do you have?
We had an ongoing discussion before, and especially on deciding what type of gameplay we will be introducing. And what we saw and what all of us are aware is if you have a look at the box products of Drakensang, they're pretty core, pretty hardcore. I mean, personally, I love it very much, but having big point games, we always need to have a little bit of a broader approach and appearance. So for us, it was a quite delicate way of setting up this type of gaming IP in order to be appealing not just for the fans, for the die-hard hardcore fans, but for people that might have never heard of Drakensang or any of these game types before, and being able to play these type of games. So it was very delicate of doing so. And of course some people say, oh my gosh, you're killing my game. And you can build the most hardcore game you want to, and there will still be some fans that say, sorry, Jagged Alliance doesn't work for me online because it's online, because it has another pixel in some area that I don't like or whatever. So
we have people that say the game totally sucks because we got the voices, we confused two voices from the two mercenaries that should have been different. And that clearly proves we have no clue.
Yeah, you got to rework that. Yeah. No, so we were quite eager to see what the existing community would say. And in the very beginning, when they first had a look, they said, let's see, let's wait what's happening. What we're seeing now is that we have more and more people, even from the old Drakensang first iteration, second one, playing our games, and they're really going back to the game and saying, okay, this is definitely what we love, how we're going about.
Okay, we've time for one last question. Anyone? Okay, thanks guys. Thank you, and buy an IP, it might help. Thank you.